right?
Yeah. Great, that's just coming online now.
Okay, and I'm going to change one slide, 2 slides actually.
No, take your time. It always takes a while for people to come on board. And as I say, we've been having a project briefing all morning. It's just
Right.
Great. That works. That's good.
Good. And one more.
So I'll just say a brief hello whilst you're doing that. So hello to anyone who's watching on YouTube, either now or in the future. In a few minutes, I'll introduce Amy Herman, and we'll be enjoying her talk on the art of perception. But it'll take a couple of minutes while we wait people to join. Hello, Carolyn.
Hello there.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
All right. Good afternoon. Nice to see you.
Really good to see you.
I'm just fixing a slide, so you're not going to see me for a second, but
Don't worry. I never do that.
Somehow I hear a note of sarcasm there.
Although I'm delighted to say that today is World Creativity and Innovation Day.
Well, what a perfect day for us to be together.
Exactly what I thought. In fact,
great?
I have to leave just before 2 o'clock to go and give a talk myself on that very topic to an external business audience. So wish me luck.
Very good luck, and you have the karma of the day behind you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I am. All right, I have to stop adding slides because there's so much to talk about that.
I never do that either.
All right, one more. So can you remind me, do we have an hour today or 90 minutes?
You can take longer. We don't have anything after this, do we, Carolyn? So we have at least an hour. And if you want to carry on with questions, that's absolutely fine.
Perfect. All right, good. Because I have.
If you want to push off after an hour, that's fine too.
Okay, there's just so much, as I was thinking about the course, and I love tailoring it. That's the intellectual challenge for me. And so I was thinking about all the concepts for us to talk about. So if the time goes too long, I promise I won't keep over the time.
You can talk to our evening if you wish, that's fine.
Well, I would love to really talk to the students as well. So I want to hear about how they process this information and how it will serve them. Okay, I have finished my slides.
Fantastic.
All right.
All right, just collect yourself. We've got
lots of water.
Just, what do we do? 3 minutes past. Just give it a couple of minutes. Wait for a few more students, and then we'll do an official.
I will tell you.
Chat.
I just turned in a manuscript for my second book that my brain feels like a dish rag because I've just been writing and editing. And so that's done. And now I am moving on to my formal application. I am applying to the PhD program at the University of Leeds. I am so excited.
Hey, that's fantastic.
I am beyond excited. I'm going to finish my PhD in art history and incorporate my work to train MI5 agents at Chatsworth.
Ooh, that's fascinating. Well, you must. Well, gosh, you must keep coming down and talking to us as well as you go along.
That would be wonderful. It's going to be over 18 months, and I've been in touch with the Duke about using his collections, and it's going to explore the idea of national identity and cultural behavior and how we can look at a quintessential British collection and rethink terrorism, domestic terrorism, and homeland security.
Wow.
I know, it's a lot on my plate right now.
That's extraordinary.
I'm very excited about it. Very, very excited about it. So hopefully when coronavirus is in the rear view mirror and I'll be able to fly over the pond, I will be able to start my studies.
Well, I look forward to welcoming you to Britain.
Thank you.
And luckily we are doing, as you probably heard, we're doing pretty well at the moment, I'm glad to say.
Yes, so, as are we. Since we've had a big change of administration that we don't even talk about, the vaccines have done very, very well, and public service and science are back on the top of the list, and we're making progress. So
yes. Well done. I won't say any more, but we all breathed a big sigh of relief. Thank you.
Yes, we did. As we did last night as well. We had a big verdict.
Yes, the world was watching that one.
The world was
Absolutely.
watching, and I was sitting having a glass of wine with a friend, and we were white knuckled because we were worried about our city and the world. If the verdict came down differently, I think my city would be burned to the ground this morning. So I'm very relieved that justice was served. So,
Amy, where are you at the moment, Amy?
I'm in New York City.
In New York, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've got some good friends in Minneapolis, so they were even more worried.
They were even more white knuckled than I was. It was really a trial with global consequences. And I live in a very populated part of the city, and I came home last night, and the square where I live, people were playing music, and it was like a beautiful spring evening, and there was a calmness over New York like I've never seen. And it could have been the polar opposite, really could have been the polar opposite. So all is well.
Yeah, no.
Until tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's true. Well, look, thank you. Let's get started now. We've got a good number of people on the call, and I'm sure lots of people will watch the recording on our YouTube channel as well.
Excellent.
So I'm not going to read out your whole bio. I know Carolyn has sent it round, but it's our huge pleasure to have you here and talk to our students. Amy, this is our practitioner talk. This is the service design course at the Royal College of Art. We have a huge number of really fascinating people, and often we have designers, and often we have people from business and things like that. And, you know, sometimes we forget to have people from perhaps the more artistic background, and especially with your profession, you're an art historian. And what I can see in your bio is an amazing ability to apply that to some pretty incredible applications, which I think makes us similar, because we like to apply what we do to, you know, places we're not necessarily invited in even. And I'm hoping in the future to give you even more of an insight into what we do here. And I know you've had a little look around. Big thanks to Rids for inviting you and getting you here. And we're really excited to hear your talk on the art of perception. So I won't continue anymore. I'm terribly sorry I have to leave just before 2. Carolyn will wind up the talk. And students, get your questions ready to go.
Yes.
But thank you, Amy. You're very welcome. And over to you, Amy Herman.
Thank you very, very much, Clive, for the lovely introduction. Thank you for having me. Thanks to Ritz for inviting me and making connections. I think the world is full of these good connections, and I'm thrilled when they come to fruition. So good afternoon to all of you. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at some slides together instead of looking at me. The slides are much more interesting. And
good, we can see those.
Yes, there you go. All good? All right.
Superb.
All right, good. So I have a few rules for all of my sessions. They're all good rules, but I just thought I would dispense with them from the beginning. And the first one is you needn't write anything down that I say. The reason I say that is I want you to experience this presentation. I want you to take part in the discussion. And if you're busy writing things down, it can be rather distracting. So what I'm going to ask, what I'm going to ask, or what I'm going to tell you is I've already done a digital summary for you. So if any of you would like a digital summary, just shoot me an email. I put up my contact information at the end, and I will get that digital summary off to you. So that's rule number 1, no note taking. Rule 2, please take part in the conversation. The more you participate, the more you'll take with you. And third is going to be a difficult rule. For the time that we're together this afternoon and for the rest of your day and hopefully for the rest of the week, I'm going to ask you as students in service design to refrain from using 2 words, and they're 2 common words. I want you to refrain from using the words obviously and clearly. And when I deliver this presentation in person, if anyone breaks the rule, I make the whole room applaud. I'm not trying to be irreverent. I'm just underscoring that we live and work in a complex world. Nothing is obvious and even less is clear. So rather than saying, well, obviously it's a case of X, I would prefer that you say, it appears to me to be a case of X because of Y and Z. So those are the rules. Let's move on to more interesting things. Oh dear. Okay, so I know you'll be, for this group in particular, there are no words, there are no charts, there are no graphs, there are no bullet points. in the presentation, purposefully done. I think visual images are quite compelling on their own. And the image that I've chosen for the opening slide, I was thinking about how to capture your imagination because you're all in such a unique field. I wanted to put an image up there that would resonate with you and get you to start thinking about specifically, how do we communicate what we see? And so I've chosen a painting by the South African artist, Philip Barlow. And for those of you who wear glasses, if your instinct is to take off your glasses and rub your eyes to bring the painting into focus, it's doing its job. It's purposefully painted this way. And I think that it's a very visually compelling image that reminds us that we need to bring the world into focus so many more times than we're already doing. It's not something you can do once a day or once a week or once a month. We live in such a highly changeable and dynamic world that we need to shift our focus continually to be conversant in the images and understand comprehensively what we see. So I'm starting with Philip Barlow's image, and it's probably throwing your eyesight into disarray. So I'm going to switch. Now, this is what we refer to as the elephant in the room, but I have a good friend who studies elephants and is really a big fan of elephants. And his theory is, if you don't talk about the elephant in the room, or if you ignore the elephant in the room, it will stomp on you and kill you. So let's get it out of the way. This is a beautiful visual image of the coronavirus. And it's a reminder that this virus, not bacteria, but virus, has upended every aspect of our lives globally. Personally, professionally, socially, economically, politically, everything in our world has been tied to this pandemic. And to borrow a line from Winston Churchill, he said during World War II, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I'm a big believer in that for my clients, for my participants, and myself as well. And so I'm trying to use this time of the pandemic, not just to survive, but to thrive, to come out of it better than we went in. And so today I want to discuss some of the tools, not only to help us emerge more productive and more efficient and more innovative after the pandemic, but to be better prepared for the next one, because something else will happen in our lifetime. I don't know what it is. I'm not prescient in that way, but we need to be prepared for the next catastrophe, the next, global, whatever it is that involves all of us. So that's enough about the pandemic. This is what's happened to our world. All cities around the world were directly impacted by this. And you can see Kuala Lumpur and Rome and London and Berlin and my own country literally flipped upside down by the artist Glenn Ligon. Now that sculpture by Ligon in the center was done long before the pandemic, but I think it beautifully illustrates what's happened here and all over the world. We still recognize our countries, but they're upside down. And we need to think about not only the tools to write them, put them right side up, but to figure out in the process how we're going to make them better when they reemerge. Spoiler alert that this is the cover of my new book. It's a work by Kumi Yamashita, and the book is coming out in December. And I love this image for many reasons, but most of all because it illustrates what I look like in the morning. And I'm sure many of you do as well. I wake up in the morning and I open one eye and I first have to ask myself, okay, what day is it? What day is it? Because they seem to melt together during a pandemic. And then I think of my world when I wake up as these randomly placed blocks. And what Kumi Yamashita did is they're seemingly random, but she arranged the blocks in such a way that when she shone a single light through them from the right side, they created the perfect profile on the left. That profile is a product of the blocks that you see. And the reason I show this to you, I think there are many reasons, but this is what we have to do every day. We need to pull it together for all of our stakeholders. I have to pull it together for my family, for myself, for my clients, for my friends, because we can't be these randomly thrown blocks. We need to pull it together, even though the circumstances in which we're living can be very constraining. So I love this image, and I think it illustrates where we are. And what I want to do with you today is not only think about how we can emerge personally and professionally better than we went into the pandemic, I want to take a peek into each of our brains, our creative brains, and think about what inspires us and what is behind the decisions that we make. And I love this work by Dali. It makes the brain or the inside of the head a work of art. And that's how I think of it. And so I want to take a deep dive today and think about what guides our decisions, our critical decisions, what guides our creativity, what guides our sense of innovation. Why? Because this is never an option. This is what the proverbial deer in the headlights looks like. You never want to be a deer in the headlights. And something like this pandemic has certainly caused a number of us to have this kind of paralysis. And hopefully it's short term. When my work came to a hard stop, I came from Rome. Who goes to Rome before a pandemic? I do. I had just come back from Rome the end of last February. I probably got the last flight out of Rome. And my work came to a hard stop the first week in March. And I was frozen. I thought, I take 6, 7, 8 flights a week, and now I can't take any. And my work has just come to a hard stop. So how can we prevent being a deer in the headlights? First, you need to stop. I should say pause, not stop. You need to pause, look, and listen. Prior to the pandemic, we were so immersed in going from point A to point B. We had objectives, we had things that we had to accomplish that we never really took the time to stop and look and listen. And if you look at the slide that I'm showing you, it's the largest equestrian sculpture in the United States. You look and you realize the horses are standing still and the water is moving. That's not the way it is. That's not the way it's supposed to be. But only when you stop and look do you realize it's not the way it's supposed to be. So how often were we not stopping to look and listen and realize that things aren't the way they're supposed to be? Another reason, another way that we can prevent being a deer in the headlights is to always remember the big picture, the overriding or overarching goals that we have for our program, for our work, for our institutions. And to illustrate this, I'm showing you the work of Joana Vasconcelos. She's a big woman and she makes big sculptures. She's Portuguese, and I had the privilege of seeing this work of art at the Guggenheim Bilbao in 2018. And I remember walking into the gallery and just being so taken by her artisanship and her craftsmanship. She made each of those mirrors and she welded them together and she soldered them together. And I was just so taken with the fine details. And I was walking around the sculpture, that's not me, by the way. And I was, looking at my face in the mirror and checking my hair and also looking at the craftsmanship of the mirrors, that I never stepped back far enough to see that these mirrors were welded into the shape of an eye mask. I never saw it. Is that irreparable harm? Not at all. But a year later, I was flipping through a catalog of Vasconcelos's work and I was so taken, and I thought, stupid me. I never stepped back to see the big picture. And we're going to talk about the big picture a lot today, because what happens is we get so mired and myopic. We want to focus in, be laser focused on what we're doing, and we lose the big picture, and I think that's dangerous. Another way to prevent being a deer in the headlights is to be like Rachel Whiteread, one of your own, who I admire immensely. She has the ability to see what others don't. How can you see what others don't, especially when you're working in the world of service design? That's your innovation, seeing what other people don't. And why do I show you this work by Rachel Whiteread? When I ask people, what do you think this is? People say, oh, it's Jell-O shots. It's not Jell-O shots. Or they say it's Big Jolly Ranchers. Those are a sucking candy we have here. It's not that either. What Rachel Whiteread did is she thought about the chair that you're all sitting in now. Think about the chair that you're sitting in. And she thought about the negative space underneath the chair. And she used the negative space under 100 different chairs to create 100 different sculptures of wax and resin. And having seen them twice, I saw them at Tate and I saw them at the National Gallery in Washington. When the light comes into the gallery at a certain angle, the collective effect of these sculptures of negative space is nothing short of extraordinary. Now, who thinks about the underside of the chair? Probably close to no one, but yet she did. She thought about this negative space that's available to all of us, and she used it as the inspiration for her sculptures. So this is what I want to do with you today. I want you to picture your work as this barn. This is a barn that's in northern Michigan, here in the States, and it had fallen into disuse. It's about a 100-year-old barn, still structurally intact, but decrepit, falling apart. The owners didn't use it anymore. And an architectural team came in. The architectural team of Katie Newell came in, and they wanted to maintain the integrity of the barn, but they wanted to make it better and different. So this is what they did. They cut an acute angle from the foundation to the roof of the barn, structurally, keeping the structural integrity, to access more light through the barn. And look at what it did. The project is called The Secret Sky. And what Katie Newell and her team did is they cut this piece out of the barn, they gave it a new source of light. And what I think is exceptionally brilliant is they filled the interior of the barn with solar generated lights. So at night, the barn was illuminated from the interior. So people could see the structure. Not only has it become a tourist destination, it's just visually beautiful and compelling, and it faces east to west. So, or I should say the cut faces east to west. So the title Secret Sky is really illustrative. It allows you another vision of the sky, and it gives you a different angle to see the barn. And that's what I want to do with you today. You are the barns. You are not decrepit or old, but I want to cut a slice into your work to give you a different access, a different way of looking at the work that you're doing. Okay, so I know a lot of you don't have your cameras on. I'm going to ask you all to raise your right hand in the air, please. Raise your right hand. It's harder for me. It's earlier in the morning for me than it is for you. All right, I want you to raise your right hand and take a look at the slide that I've put up on the screen. Now, you can only put your hand down if you see something absolutely definitive in this slide that you could describe to somebody who wasn't looking at it. If you see something absolutely definitive, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, I'm going to tell you there's a mammal in the slide. If you see a mammal definitively and unequivocally, you can put your hand down. Now, if your hand is still up, you're probably getting pissed at me, and I'm going to say that the mammal in the picture has 4 legs. If you see a mammal in this slide that has 4 legs, you can put your hand down. Now, you can all put your hands down because you're getting annoyed with me. And I'm going to show you an overexposed version of this photograph, and I'm going to show you what you were looking at. A cow. Okay? You were looking at a cow. Now, let's go back. You see it now? You can't unsee what I've just shown you, right? Now, this is not a trompe-l'oeil. This is not an optical illusion. This is a real photograph, and it's called the Renshaw cow. And it was developed by a man named Dr. Samuel Renshaw to help American Navy pilots see enemy warfare faster in World War II. He'd put up these visual exercises, and he would say, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see? But that's not why I show it to you. I show it to you because about 10 years ago, a man came to speak here in New York, which is where I'm based, and his name is Apollo Robbins. Now, for those of you who don't know who Apollo Robbins is, he used to be a professional con man. He was a thief, but now he works on the right side of the law, as do I. And I had heard about him and read about him, but I never saw him live. So I grabbed a friend of mine. I said, come on, let's go see Apollo Robbins speak. So we get to the museum where he's speaking, and there's Apollo at the door, shaking everyone's hand. Hello, hello. He grabbed my arm. Hello, welcome. And I'm thinking, that's weird. New Yorkers don't behave that way. Nobody greets you at the door when you go to hear someone speak. Well, lo and behold, I get to my seat, and my favorite bracelet that I wear was gone. Totally gone. Apollo Robbins had slipped the bracelet off my wrist in the few seconds that it took to distract me and shake my hand. He didn't just take my bracelet. He took people's glasses. He took their watches. He took their belts. He took whatever he could get his hands on. And then he put all the loot on a table in the front, and we were collectively embarrassed. So when I got my bracelet back, I decided to listen to what the man had to say. And he began with this slide. And he asked us to do what I asked you to do. Raise your right hand in the air and put it down when you see something definitive. And my friend Robin, who attended the presentation with me, put her hand down immediately. And I was squinting and I'm thinking, is this a flying platypus here? Is there a kitten down here? I thought, is there an owl up here? I didn't know what I was looking at. And the harder I looked, the less I saw. And yet Robin saw it immediately. I don't know how many of you saw the cow in this slide, but I bet more of you didn't than did. So I'm beginning our session today with the premise that no two people see anything the same way. Not through your eyes attached to your brain. Nobody sees things the same way. And the sooner you acclimate to that, the better you're going to be going forward. And I can't underscore this enough. Not your partners, not your friends, not your team, not your colleagues, not your professors. Nobody sees things exactly the same way that you do. So commit that to memory. Now, I hate to add to the bad news, or maybe the good news, but a colleague of mine took these photographs right outside his office window. And the picture on the left, if you notice, they're from exactly the same vantage point. The picture on the left forces your eyes to see the trees beyond. And the picture on the right, you're looking at the intricacies of the islands. So in addition to no two people seeing things the same way, I have to remind you that no two people focus the same way. You can be looking at the same problem, the same data, the same drawings, the same material, and there's no guarantee that you're focusing on different aspects in the same way. So what's the antidote to this? We need to communicate what we see. We need to talk about what we see to make sure that we're focusing on the same things when we need to be focusing on the same things. So how do I do this? How do I work with people across the professional spectrum? And I'll tell you more about this to make sure that they're looking at art to change their perspective. I'm showing you a work from 1587 by Giuseppe Arcimbaldo. You don't have to worry about artist names or dates. What is it? It's a lovely painting. It's a black bowl with some onions and leeks and turnips and greens, and there's some nuts in the corner. It's really a lovely painting. But the real power of the painting is revealed when you turn it upside down. And it becomes the vegetable gardener. Do you all see the hat and the cheeks and the nose and the lips and the ears? And it reminds me of what the late Dr. Wayne Dyer said in a book that I read by him. And he said, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. I'm going to say that again. Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. This is what I do in the art of perception. I help people, I travel the globe, and I work with leaders in all fields to help them figuratively flip a painting upside down. Because when you have the ability to change your lenses or change your perspective and change the way you look at things, your work, your world, your family, those things are going to change. And I think that kind of change is what underlies great innovation. So brief introduction. How did I get here? And what am I going to do today? Now, if my 18-year-old son were standing in the living room with me, he'd poke his head into the camera and he would tell you that I made this whole thing up. But I really didn't make the whole thing up. So I am a recovering attorney. I was a lawyer and I hated being a lawyer. And I'm also an art historian. And I like to think that I combine the practical aspects of each of those disciplines, legal analysis and visual analysis, to create this program 20 years ago. Yeesh, that tells you how old I am. So when I left the private practice of law, I became the head of education at a gem of a museum here in New York City called the Frick Collection. And I worked at the Frick Collection for many years. And while I was there, I started this program, and it was for medical students only. And the idea was very simple. Take medical students out of the hospital, out of the clinical setting, bring them to an art museum, teach them how to analyze works of art. So when they go back to the clinical setting, hopefully they'll be better observers of their patients. It worked beautifully. It wasn't my idea. They started the program at Yale, the Yale Center for British Art, and with Yale's gracious permission, I started a version of the program here in New York City. And one night I was out to dinner with my friends, and I was telling them that my medical students didn't just have vision like this, they had vision like this. It was all about diagnosis and renal failure and MRIs, which is what you would expect from medical students. And one of my friends said to me, why are you just doing this for medical students? Why aren't you doing this for people who really need good observation skills? I said, like whom? He said, like detectives, homicide detectives. And I thought, why am I not doing this for homicide detectives? So that was Saturday night. Monday morning, I picked up the phone. I called my hometown police department, the NYPD. God help the guy that answered the phone at the switchboard. I said to him, hi, my name is Amy Herman. I'm the head of education at the Frick Collection, and I have a super idea. I train medical students to enhance their observation skills by learning to look at works of art, and I think you should send homicide detectives to my museum. Dead silence. Dead silence. And then I was transferred this many times until I reached a deputy commissioner who heard what I was saying. Fast forward 6 months, every newly promoted captain in the NYPD had to come to the Frick Collection to take my course. Fast forward again to July 25th, 2005, my collaboration with the NYPD, by the way, that's me in the top picture of this slide with my first group of homicide investigators at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I used to do this as well. And you fast forward to July of 2005, and my collaboration with the NYPD landed on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And my world exploded. I mean, it absolutely exploded. I got calls from all over the world, and everyone said the same thing. Come teach us to see like you did those cops in New York City. I can't teach anybody how to see. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a neurobiologist. But what I can do, and what I hope to do with you today, is my very simple method called 4 A's. And I think the 4 A's are particularly applicable in service design. The first day, any new problem that you're presented with, any new situation that you need to solve, you assess your situation. You put parameters around it and you say, okay, what am I facing? Then you analyze the problem. You prioritize your information. You decide what you will retain, what you're going to get rid of. You narrow the problem down. Then you articulate it. You tell your team, you write an abstract, you send an email, you talk about it with people, and then you act. You make decisions. You assess, you analyze, you articulate, and you act so many times during the day, but people forget how intertwined observation and perception are to those 4 A's. So after the article in the Wall Street Journal appeared, I quit my job at the Frick Collection. I don't work there anymore. And for the last 15 years, 12 years, I have been traveling the world. It is my honor and privilege to train 13 divisions of my hometown police department. All new surveillance agents of the FBI take this course. I work within the CIA. I work in every branch of the military. I've trained the Metropolitan Police of Scotland Yard. I've worked at Interpol. I train our Navy SEAL Special Operations, and I've done this presentation for NATO. I work in financial services, blah, blah, blah. And in 2016, I wrote a book called Visual Intelligence. I used to have a copy of it. Here it is in Dutch. I'm holding it up. Here it is in Dutch, supporting my laptop. Anyway, I don't tell you all this to tell you why I was on Delta Airlines every day of my life before the pandemic. I tell you this because I have a really unique lens across the professional spectrum. And this is what I've noticed. If you are in my session, yourselves included, you already have good, if not extraordinary, observation and perception skills. That's not the problem. The problem, as I perceive it, is in the consistent breakdown of the effective communication of what it is we observe. Something gets lost from here to here to here and to here, and I don't know what it is. So I'm using art to fill the gap. Crazy as that sounds, it's working. I don't know why it's working, but it's working, and we can discuss that in the debrief. I can't keep up with the requests that I'm getting. And I work with people in every field, from suicide prevention to hospice nurses. I'm now working with a group of psychiatrists in prison to help the psychiatrists transition the prisoners from protective custody to mainstream prison custody by looking at art. Go figure that out. Anyway, so I have 3 goals for you today. Number 1, I want each of you to leave this presentation thinking differently about one aspect of your work. I don't know what it's going to be, but I want each of you to leave thinking differently. Number 2, I want to help you convert observable details into actionable knowledge, because in your field, that's what you need to do. How can you take what you observe and make it actionable to design something? And 3, I want to help you evolve, because it's an evolution, from passive seeing to active assessment, from seeing something and assessing it and thinking about it in a different way. So that's how I got here, and that's what we're going to be doing today. This is not a class of art history. When I tell people what I do, they scratch their heads and they say, you're teaching cops art history? No, this is not about Picasso versus Pollock. Okay, now, I'm sure you know this, Pollock on the left, Picasso on the right, but it's not a class about Picasso versus Pollock. This is about changing your visual data. Because I'm sure you look at a lot of art for inspiration and innovation, but it's not about looking at art substantively. It's about giving your left brain a rest, engaging your right brain. So when you go back to using your left brain, as you have to do in service design, you'll see things more perceptively, or hopefully. But to do this with me today, I want you to shift your perspective. Why? Because I know that you don't look at art for a living. I'm sure you use art as an inspiration, and you certainly are creative, but it doesn't mean that you look to art for all your answers. I want you to shift your perspective like this guy. His name is JR. And for those of you who don't know who JR is, he's what they call a photographer. He takes a picture, he blows it up to billboard size, and he puts them all over the world. Sidewalks, runways, tops of buildings, sides of buildings. They're really very cool. But early in his career, he had a problem. He never got a permit to do any of this. So he would just put his photographs wherever he wanted to. And some countries issued warrants for his arrest because they said he was defacing public property. So while those warrants were pending, he was commissioned to do this self-portrait, and I think it's brilliant. It's called Self-Portrait in a Woman's Eye, Kenya, 2009. Why do I think it's brilliant? He shifted his perspective on what self-portraiture is. Took a picture of himself, and you don't know what he looks like. Why? If you knew what he looked like, then it would be easier to get arrested, and who wants to get arrested? But I'm going to make an assumption that no one at the Royal College of Art in the service design program is trying to evade arrest. And if you are, don't tell me. But I'm going to make the assumption. So why do you need to shift your perspective? You need to shift your perspective because this is the world you live and work in. We are subsumed by the coronavirus. The vaccines are here, but they're still on the horizon. Our lives have been reduced to Zoom. Black Lives Matter. You're having a painful split that's going to go on for years. Oops. The Instagram is blocking your logo. Your classrooms, you're thinking about design in a different way. Disruptive technology is everywhere. Climate change is raging, and travel will never be the same that it was before. So you need to wrap your head around each of these issues because you work in such a functioning design system. You are thinking about business and government and policy and trying to effectuate design. You're trying to come up with designs that solve problems. So the more you know about the world and its problems, the better you're going to be able to do your work. But I don't have enough squares to put all the issues that we're facing in our world. And there is no bright line between the world you live in and the world you work in. They're completely together. So you need to be constantly shifting your perspective. The other world that you work in, and I'm just fascinated by the visualization of your program. I love this. I just love this. And I was looking at the description of your course and all of these composite parts, the dynamic, the holistic, the curiosity, the innovation, the purpose, the planet, the transformation, the courage, the curiosity. How can I memorize these? Because looking at these visual elements reminds me of what they are. They are the backdrop to what you're doing. So you already have a built-in big picture, purpose, planet, curiosity, transformation, and you need to manifest them in the work that you do. And that involves constantly shifting your perspective to think about projects vis-a-vis this ethos that's part of your program. You also need to shift your perspective to have what's called visual intelligence. By the way, that's the name of my book from 2016, Visual Intelligence. What does visual intelligence mean? It means it means two things. One, seeing what other people don't. And two, focusing on what you need to see and filtering out the noise because our world is full of noise. And to illustrate this, I'm showing you a work of art by Ray Bartkus. It's in Lithuania, and look at this carefully. He has painted the image on the side of a building so that in its reflection, when it's inverted, it looks like it's actually happening on the water. Think about how cool that is. He had to see what other people didn't. He had to envision what this reflection would look like inverted. So what's the process? What are the mechanics of seeing what other people don't? First, he had to look at the dimensions of the building because it was not a straight side of the building. So we had to look at the big picture all the way down to the small details of actually painting the image to create this. Visual intelligence involves what you do all the time, seeing things in parts and putting them together in a way that other people just don't see. You also need, to shift your perspective to see things in a different light. I'm showing you an image that everybody recognizes. In 2019, the towers of Notre Dame burned. It was terrible. It was terrible for everybody. It was terrible if you are a Parisian, an art historian, an architectural historian, French, Catholic, Christian, a citizen of the world. This was a terrible image. But to really understand the scope of the problem and to even think about fixing it, because that's what everybody wanted, was for Notre Dame to be fixed, you need to step back. You need to see the big picture. You have to understand breadth and scope and depth of the problem before you can begin to address it and fix it. Hence the name of my new book, Fixed. This is easy. This is not. But if you make this part of your everyday automatic way of looking at things, saying, you know, I see this piece, but I want to see the bigger piece, it becomes automatic and you start incorporating the big picture and the small details. Now, ideally, some people want their work to look like this. They want it to be symmetrical and functional, like Ellsworth Kelly's paintings, primary colors, even edges. But this is not what your work looks like because you work at the vortex of business and government and policy and function and problem solving. Your work looks more like a Julie Meritou painting, with all due respect. And I love Julie Meritou's paintings. But it's not as chaotic as you might think. I like to think of it as ordered chaos. It's dynamic, it's changeable, it's moving. She's integrated architecture and two-dimensional arts and painting and pen and calligraphy. And she's incorporated this into a moving, highly creative, highly changing environment. While some people might want this, it's boring. This is more like what you do, but you have to shift your perspective to keep this all in order. Another reason you need to shift your perspective, as if I sound like a broken record, is the world is changing. We live in highly changeable environments. I find that very exciting. Not everybody likes it. And to illustrate this, I'm showing you, most of you will recognize the painting of Piet Mondrian in the foreground. But the truth is, all three of these paintings are by Mondrian. The one on the upper left is 1901, the one on the upper right is 1917, and the one in the foreground is 1937. Now, I'm not a believer in change for change's sake. We don't want to just change things because that's what you do. You need to understand the how of change, the why of change, and most importantly, the impact of change. How can change make things better? And so what do? We have to communicate why we're changing, how we're changing, and what the impact of that change is going to be. It doesn't take an art historian to see that Mondrian didn't just change how he saw the world, but how he expressed his vision of what he saw. And that's how we ended up with that iconic form of painting in the 20th century, later in the 20th century. Now, to illustrate that no two change is too small to consider or to contemplate, I'm showing you the work of Jorge Mendes Blake. Blake decided to make a sculpture, all bricks, no mortar, over Kafka's book El Castillo. Now, as he started to build the wall, you could see that the book disrupted the symmetry of the bricks. But as you got to the outer edges of the wall, you couldn't see the book anymore. But I want you to look at the effect of that tiny little paperback on the entire work of art. One new idea, one new approach can have an immeasurable and significant impact. I've worked with companies who have changed just one part of the process of manufacturing, and it has saved them millions of dollars. I think about the physicians and nurses that instituted centuries ago, washing hands with soap and water between patients, eliminating cross-infection. Think of the effect of soap and water in eliminating cross-infection. How many millions of people have had their lives saved by that? Think about the effect of masks. We wear masks during a pandemic. Hand sanitizer. Tiny implementations have had monumental effect. So I never want to hear anyone who's taken my course to say, you know, it's too minor. I don't even want to suggest it. Nothing's too minor. So how do we do this? What does it take? It takes first looking in the mirror. And looking in the mirror is hard. And I'm showing you 7 self-portraits. Frida Kahlo, Cindy Sherman, Alice Neal, Annie Leibovitz, Gustave Courbet, Rembrandt, and my favorite in the lower center, a self-portrait by Glenn Ligon. And what I love about this self-portrait, I run all my slides by my 18-year-old because he tells me the brutal truth. He tells me what works, what doesn't work. And I said to him, what do you think of this neon as a self-portrait? Ligon illuminated the words, face me, face you. And my son said, Mom, that's not what it says. It says, face me, I face you. That escaped me completely. I saw that as a divider, not the word I. So even when we look in the mirror, there's no guarantee that we're going to see things as they really are, or that we're going to see the same things that other people see in us. So looking in the mirror is hard. You have to know what you do well. You have to know your strengths and your weaknesses because you can't fix them until you address them and say them out loud. But don't do this. Don't do what Edward Vuillard did. He made a self-portrait with his eyes closed. I don't know how he did it, but he painted himself with his eyes closed. And I believe that that's cheating. Because if you close your eyes and you only see the best, you're cheating yourself. Because we can't just have survivorship bias. We need to see what we do wrong because there are no successes without failures. Don't close your eyes when you're looking in the mirror. Because you know what? You might miss this. You might miss one of the most important takeaways, and I think one of the foundations of the work that all of you are doing, seeing the potential in something. So I took these pictures. I'm a terrible photographer. I love art, but I am ferociously uncreative. I took these pictures on my corner, 14th Street. Somebody in the audience might recognize those garbage cans from 14th Street. And that's my green umbrella on the left. And we have this issue in New York City. I'm sure you have it in London. On days that it rains, these guys magically appear at the subway. I don't know where they are on sunny days, but they want to sell you a $5 umbrella. And they're always there. They know the weather better than anybody else. And I'm the sucker who never has an umbrella. So I don't want to tell you how many $5 umbrellas I've bought in my lifetime. I could probably feed a small country on the number of umbrellas that I've bought. Anyway, without fail, I'm holding my new cheap umbrella. And the first gust of wind that comes, my umbrella turns upside down and falls apart and everybody else's stays intact. So what do? I curse the $5 umbrella. I throw it in the garbage can. But on the day that I threw that green umbrella away, I was comforted by the fact that there were all these other umbrellas in the garbage can. There were other losers like me who buy the $5 umbrella and throw them away. But the artist Jean Shin had a different idea. And I think you'll find this interesting. She walked around New York City after 5 or 6 storms, and she pulled out all the failed, broken umbrellas. She removed the infrastructure and the handles and the metal. And look what she did with the fabric. She created this beautiful sculpture that she's installed in different parts of the world. And ironically, when you stand under the sculpture, it sways in the wind like a storm. But ironically, it blocks you from the sun. It shades you from the sun, which is not what you think of for an umbrella fabric. Now, I know that none of you, or I hope none of you, were running around London pulling failed umbrellas out of the garbage can, but I am going to ask you this. How do you see potential in people, in ideas, in concepts, in materials, in form, in iconography, especially when they fail other people? When someone says, you know what, that's not going to work for us. What if you believe that it will work? How do you articulate your vision of potential? Especially when you have a countervailing argument and someone says, no, 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 it's not going to work, and you believe that it's going to. How do you talk about that? In Japan, we call this kintsugi. I have to take some water, sorry. Oh, my coffee makes me thirsty. In Japan, they call this kintsugi. Japanese ceramicists and potters, they make these beautiful vases and bowls and cups. And invariably, some of them come out broken and asymmetrical and imperfect. And rather than throwing the flawed pottery away, the ceramicists and artisans fill those cracks in with gold and silver and platinum lacquer. And you know what happens? These pieces become more precious and more valuable than had they been perfect in the first place, because each is unique. So in your work in service design, I'm going to ask, how do you incorporate kintsugi? How are you fixing what's broken with resources that are readily available to you? Because this is not the time when we can run out into the world and say, let's try this and let's try this. This is a pandemic. And one thing that has been consistent pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic, I'm guessing, is that time is going to be your most precious commodity. You've got problems to solve, and you don't have unlimited resources of time. So how are you practicing kintsugi? How are you looking at a problem and attempting to fix it with resources that are already at your disposal? Now, let me ask you this. I'm going to go into the chat room here, okay? I'd like you to type in what all these images have in common, please. What do they all have in common? They're women, good. Broken faces, expressions, yes, faces. They're women, they're all portraits, they're all from the shoulders up. They all have the same title, believe it or not. They're all called Head of a Woman. And guess what? Every single one of these images is by the same artist. They are all by Picasso. Now, everyone who comes to my class, everyone for whom I'm teaching this course is talented. What does that mean? You're good at what you do. I'm sure you're all very good at what you do. You're talented. But I believe to master what you're doing takes more than talent. It takes what's called agility, the ability to express that talent in many different ways. Look what Picasso mastered here. He mastered paint and pencil and pastel and crayon, ink, gold, bronze, plaster, ceramic, silver. I'm not asking you to be Picasso. I'm asking you to think about manifesting your work in as many different ways as possible. Why? Because that's what the times demand of you right now. We live in a complex world. You have infinite numbers of problems to solve in service design. I think it's a brilliant concept that you're looking at problems and you're trying to be transformative in the most practical and yet creative of ways. So how do I do this? How do I work with critical care nurses, brand new detectives, vice presidents in banks, and Interpol officers? Make them look at art and achieve the goal that I said before, that I want them all to leave thinking differently about one aspect of their work. I ask them to look at a work of art like the one I'm showing you now. And I say, okay, step in close to the work. And as you're stepping in close, I want you to ask questions. What is it made of? Who's the artist? How did they do it? How long did it take them? Why did they choose this medium? And if you ask the right questions, you'll find out that this work of art, made by Kumi Yamashita, is made of a wooden board, 10,000 nails, and one unbroken piece of sewing thread. The whole thing is made from one unbroken piece of sewing thread. Now, some of you might be saying, wow, that's really cool. That's really amazing. And others might be thinking, yeah, so what? What does that have to do with service design? And the answer is everything. Because what unites all of you in this program, among, including the fact that you're all studying in the same discipline, is that each of you, for your specific projects and your specific ideas, each of you has to ask questions to elicit the information you need to complete your project. And I want to make sure that you're framing those questions in such a way to elicit specifically the information you need to do your job or to complete the project. Is this program that I teach around the world about art? Not at all. I'm just using art as the vehicle to get us to rethink our sense of critical inquiry. And I can think of few professions outside of yours where asking questions is absolutely critical, because you need to ask questions to find out all the facets of the project you're working on to come up with a complete and efficacious solution, something that's going to solve the problem. So how do we do this? First, we need to lay the groundwork. And I mean, lay the basic groundwork. In our world, people want to show you how smart and sophisticated they are, and nobody wants to talk about the basics. Sorry. Nobody wants to talk about the basics. So I often put these two works of art up and I say, okay, who's going to tell me how are they similar or different? And I hear all sorts of responses. People want to show me how smart they are. So they tell me, oh, that's easy. You have a man and woman on the left and two men on the right. They're white on the left. One man is white, one man is black on the right. Eyes open on the left. One man's eyes are open. One man's eyes are closed on the right. I've even had people say, oh, they're straight on the left and gay on the right. How would you know that? By looking at images. How would you know that? You wouldn't. But what I really want the astute observer to say at the outset, lay the foundation for me and say, I'm looking at two works of art. The one on the left is a painting and the one on the right is a photograph. And then I want the astute observer to say, I'm looking at two works of art. Each one has two people in it and I'm looking at them in profile. Because you know what? If you're sending me an email or you are on the phone or you're texting me, I can't see what you see. And before you go into nuance and detail and your impressions, tell me what you see. Lay the groundwork for me. And in the worst case scenario, everyone's going to be on the same page. But in the best case scenario, you're going to bring them there. And that's vitally important. When you're going to be communicating with clients, they're not in your head. I hate to break it to you. They're not in your head. They can't see what you see and they can't think what you're thinking. Bring them to where you are by laying the groundwork. All right, go back to the chat. And I want you to look at these two images and tell me, how are they similar and how are they different? In any way. And do not say Goya and Lucian Freud. That's not what I'm interested in here. Visually, how are these similar? How are they different? Both naked, good. What else? Different body shapes, good. Both on a couch, they're reclining. We have two nude white women. They're brunette, good. They're laying on a couch, they're reclining in opposite directions, different stages of life. That's a nice way of putting it. They're both brunette. One has her hands behind her head. One has a hand on the couch. She has a hand cupping her right breast. They're on different kinds of couches. The woman in the top is on a chaise lounge. The gaze is different. Good. One woman's eyes are open. One woman's eyes are closed. The woman in the bottom picture is on a scrappy couch. The upholstery is ripped. The cushions are gone. And yes, somebody said it. Yes, the backgrounds are different. One has carpet, one doesn't. Yes, their sizes are different. The woman in the bottom picture, lots of ways to say it. The woman in the bottom picture is larger than the woman in the top picture. The woman in the top picture is thinner than the woman on the bottom. I'm not passing judgment, but people are reticent to talk about the different body sizes. The woman in the top is thinner, the woman in the top is, but even that isn't the reason I juxtaposed the two images. It was about 12 years ago that I was teaching a group of psychiatric physicians, and I put the two pictures together and I said, okay, similarities and differences. And a very senior psychiatrist from South Africa stood up, and I'll never forget his comments. He gave me permission to repeat his comments. He said, the woman in the bottom picture is morbidly obese and the woman in the top picture is perfectly healthy. And I said, doctor, with all due respect, can you really tell me that the woman in the top picture is perfectly healthy? How do you know she's not schizophrenic? How do you know her gallbladder doesn't bother her? How do you know she doesn't have a disease of the blood or her blood pressure's high? And to his credit, in front of all his colleagues, he said, I can't believe how wrong I was. I said, you weren't wrong, but your choice of words was poor. And I'm going to tell you what I said to that group and every group since then. There are very few things that are 100% in your control. Choice of words is one of them. Every word matters and every word counts. When people say words matter, they do. Because when you are in a client situation, your clients are not just listening to you, they're relying on what you say. So you need to choose your words carefully and make sure you know what you want to say and know what you don't want to say. Very important. So this is probably one of the most important concepts. One of the things I love about working across professions is I steal concepts from one profession that I think are going to be applicable to another. And I think that this one is particularly important for those in service design. This is a painting by Magritte. And if I asked you to describe the painting to somebody who couldn't see it and they were going to draw what you described to them, you'd probably say, well, there's a train coming out of a fireplace, there's steam going up the chimney, there's a fireplace, there's a wood grain on the floor, there's wainscoting on the walls, there's a mantle on the fireplace, there's a clock, there are candlesticks, there's the mirror. And depending on how nerdy you are, you might even say what time you think it is on the clock. But what this painting illustrates for me and what I try to share is a concept called the pertinent negative. I stole it from emergency medicine. And what it means is you say what you don't see in addition to what you do see to actually give a more accurate picture of what you observe. So in emergency medicine, if someone comes into the clinic, the urgent clinic, and the physician thinks that person has, let's say, pneumonia. Pneumonia has 3 symptoms. The physician sees symptom 1, she sees symptom 2, but she sees that symptom 3 is absent. That's the pertinent negative. You need to say that symptom 3 is not there because then it's not pneumonia. So if you use the pertinent negative, saying what you don't see in the context of this picture, you can say, you know, there's a train coming out of the fireplace. By the way, there are no tracks under the train and there is no fire in the fireplace because in my 8-year-old mind, if you tell me to draw a fireplace, I'm going to draw logs and a fire and smoke unless you tell me not to. If you tell me to draw candlesticks, I'm going to put candles in unless you tell me not to. So the pertinent negative is a very powerful tool. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to talk about what you don't see, but it's so powerful because it fills in the void. When you talk about what you do see, it's only half the picture. Let me give you another visual illustration of the pertinent negative because I think it's so important. In 1913, Franz Marc painted this iconic painting called The Tower of Blue Horses. I won't butcher it with my version of German. I don't speak German well. And The Tower of Blue Horses was just an icon in Germany. Families loved it. People had reproductions of it in their homes. They put postcards. They had images. Everybody knew The Tower of Blue Horses. And the painting was seen for the very last time in 1938. Art historians believe that it found its way into Hitler's collection. It's never been seen since. And I was in Berlin 2 years ago for work, almost 3 years ago now. And I went to an exhibition at the Modern Art Museum near where I was staying, and it was called Vermisst, which in German means missing. And they asked 25 contemporary artists in Berlin and 25 contemporary artists also in Munich to create a new body of work inspired by the Tower of Blue Horses. And this is what I found. A spectacular, extraordinary, just vast body of work, all inspired by something that doesn't exist. The pertinent negative. What's the pertinent negative? The Tower of Blue Horses is not there to look at anymore in real life, but yet look what they were able to create around it and notwithstanding its absence. You need to think about absence as a positive thing. Look what Rachel Whiteread does with absence. The negative space under a chair, a pertinent negative. She created something out of nothing. That's a luxury. We don't have the chance to look at something that's not there and create something around it. One more practical example of the pertinent negative. In World War II, the Royal Air Force took a real hit of its warplanes. Took a hit because of German anti-aircraft fire. And when the planes came back, they were heavily damaged. I'm showing you a picture of the heavily damaged planes. And the decision had to be made, we don't have enough armor to reinforce the whole planes. What do we fix before we send the planes out again? And everyone agreed. Everyone concurred that they should fix the damaged planes where they were damaged. But it was one Hungarian mathematician who said, no, you're looking at this the wrong way. You need to reinforce the undamaged parts of the plane. Why? Because the planes that were damaged in those areas didn't come back. Think about that, fixing the undamaged parts of the plane, because the planes that were shot in those critical areas didn't come back. That's how the pertinent negative works. Powerful, powerful. I want to talk very briefly about pattern recognition, because I'm sure it's something all of you deal with. I'm showing you 3 paintings by Alex Katz of his wife. I think you can all see the similarities, but noticing the differences, it's a little more subtle. You can see the shape of the lips, the fall of the hair, the eyebrows, the eyes, even the color of the coat is slightly different. But pattern recognition goes one step further. I'm showing you 5 sculptures by Matisse of the same woman called Jeannette. Notice that Matisse pairs down, I call them his Jeannettes. He pairs them down so that the last one is almost unrecognizable. It is the essence of what he wants to communicate. And notably, in the second from the left, why is there an extra pedestal? Because he's eliminated the neck, and that he put the neck back in. How do we see similarities and differences, and how do we improve? But the one warning I want to give you about pattern recognition is you're going to see some patterns over and over again, but don't let pattern recognition evolve into patterns of expectation, because no 2 situations are ever exactly similar. And just because you see certain aspects, don't expect to have a certain result. You can look for the result, but don't necessarily expect it to happen. And don't forget that patterns happen in human behaviors as well. I'm showing you 2 paintings by Picasso, and the similarities and differences we can see, but there are big similarities and big differences. The painting on the left has 3 people, the one on the right has 2. There's a man and a woman in close proximity in both of the paintings. There's a diamond pattern on the sweater of the man, but the palettes of the colors, one is cool, one is warm. And then there's that sense of human intimacy. They're very close to each other, and yet there's some kind of tension. Pertinent, negative, nobody's smiling. There's really not a lot of happiness here. So pattern recognition also applies to human behavior. And to be able to watch, when you watch human behavior, to understand how you're going to design something that's going to improve the life of someone, whether it's transportation or home design, whatever it is, you have to factor in human behavior to pattern recognition. And one of the last points I want to make is something that's coming up in our world more and more, is the concept of contradiction. You're going to run into contradiction a lot. I run into it almost every day. How do we articulate contradiction? And as the world is waking up from the pandemic, you're going to see contradictions because things are not going to be the way they were before. And how do we articulate them? I'm showing you this photograph from Cuba. And what I find so interesting, it was a formerly grand home, and yet the contradiction is you've got the walls are peeling, the home is in disrepair, or the building is in disrepair, and you've got laundry hanging in the middle of the room, which is not what you would necessarily put within a grand interior. So how do we articulate those contradictions? How do we reconcile them? And recognizing that sometimes contradictions can't be reconciled. And I think it's a particularly timely place to think about contradiction, because as the world wakes up from the pandemic, you know that the new normal is not going to look like it did 13 months ago. Our whole worlds have changed. I mean, the simple thing, I'm sure you have this in London, we're beginning to dine out again in New York, but nobody has a menu. You scan it on your phone. You look at the menu in the restaurant on your phone. Who's going to hold a menu again? You think about how many people have touched menus and then don't wash their hands. Nobody wants to hold a menu anymore. Is it kind of clumsy to look at a menu on a phone? Yes, but it's certainly more sanitized. So how do we deal with contradictions? You want to have a dinner without your phone, and yet you have to bring up the menu on your phone. One more contradiction, Gabriel Orozco. I love his work. Here we have 4 bicycles that are intertwined in such a way, it's motion and inertia together. He created a sculpture. I don't know how precarious, I mean, it's so precarious. It looks like if you breathe on it, it will fall over. And the bicycles look like they want to take off in 4 different directions, and yet they're completely inert. And they're balanced, and I don't know how. So thinking about contradiction, not only does it make you more creative, it gives you the ability to look at both sides of an issue without necessarily reconciling that contradiction. Last story I tell you before I bring it all together and open up for discussion. So my son is now 18, but when he was young, he had a babysitter, a nanny, and she believed in fresh air for children. And she had my son outdoors every day. Could have been freezing cold. She ran him around. Now looking back, she did it to make him tired. And she ran him around in the playground, and she sat on these benches. We live near the West Village here in New York City. And she sat on these benches day after day, month after month, year after year. And while she was there, she met a friend. And her friend was a man. He had 3 children, and they became friends. They talked about the world, their observations, their children. And she used to tell me that he would disappear for weeks at a time, but then he would just show up again. And one day I came home to my apartment, and Monica was sitting on my couch crying. She was holding her heart, tears streaming down her face. I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "You know, my friend from the playground, he died. I'm very sad." I expressed my condolences, my sympathies. I said, "I know you were close. I know you saw him all the time. How did you find out that he died?" And she points to the television. And I look at the news on the television, and I look at the screen, and then I look at her and I say, "That man on the television was your friend in the playground?" Her friend was the actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. World renowned, movies, Broadway, London theater, awards, Emmys, Oscars, the whole thing. And she had no idea who he was. And I said to her, "Do you know who your friend was?" It was Philip Seymour Hoffman, this world renowned actor. And she kept saying, "I don't care who he was. He was my friend." And so I thought about this for weeks and months afterwards. And what's my takeaway for you? There are going to be times that you are missing a critical piece of information. In the intelligence world at the FBI, we call it an intel gap. You're going to miss critical information. And you have a resource available to you that few people recognize. When you are missing that critical piece of information, default to your humanity. And it will guide you to do what's right. Because before we are doctors and patients and lawyers and clients, we are all human. And that's what Monica did. She defaulted to her humanity. She treated Philip Seymour Hoffman with kindness and compassion and empathy and friendship as she would any person, not knowing at all that he was as famous as he was. One last picture before I bring it all together. Sorry, I had too many slides. I showed you in the beginning of the presentation that no 2 people, I showed you the man who took a picture of himself in a woman's eye. Remember JR? This is his work. This is what he does. And when I published my first book, my editor wanted evidence, evidence, evidence. Show us that your methodology works. Everything you've told us is anecdotal. So I did a test. I put this picture up for 6 months in every class that I taught. And I asked the participants to write 4 words to describe what they see. So in your head, I want you to come up with 4 words to describe this picture. And I collected the papers. Do you know that 1/3 of the participants did not use the word face, painting, or photograph in their 4 words? And I thought, how could that be? What else would you say? They said a lot of things. They said stairs, hot, climbing, wires, favela, Rio, Brazil, boys, beer, slum, ghetto, trucks. They said all sorts of things. And I realized something. I told you at the beginning of this presentation that no 2 people see anything the same way. And now as I begin to conclude, I'm going to refine that and tell you that no 2 people prioritize the same way. You are accountable for your prioritizations, especially in your designs. Why something is overriding and more important than something else, because no 2 people prioritize the same way. And the only way you're going to reconcile it with somebody else's prioritization is to communicate your own. Blah, blah, blah. We've been going for over an hour, looking at artworks, can't take any notes, thinking about what you see. What are your takeaways? Number 1, I guarantee that things are going to go wrong. Now, don't get me wrong. If you gave me that donut, I'd eat it right now in about 10 seconds. But you need to understand that your observations have consequences. There are consequences to your observations. And how do we convert observable details into actionable knowledge? You own the restaurant, and this happens. What do you do with the donut? Do you throw it away? Do you give it to a child for free? Do you keep it there? Do you eat it? What do you do based on what you see? Number 2, not everything is fixable. And I know in your cross-discipline work, you want to believe that everything is fixable, but it's not. Glenn Taylor is the artist on the left. He found these porcelain cups and saucers broken in his mother's attic after she died, and he tried to fix them. Barbed wire didn't do the job. Not everything can be fixed. But if you look at the work of Tati Freitas on the right, that artist tries to fix things using different kinds of materials. That is more successful than what's on the left. So decide, if you possibly can, what has the potential to be fixed, what you think you can fix, and try to recognize early on what can't be fixed, because we have a finite number of resources, and let's devote our resources to what we really believe can be fixed and get rid of the other things. cut your losses is what we call it. When you have the opportunity, as you did today, to look at something through a different lens, take that opportunity. I don't think I have to encourage this group to do that. I think you do it as much as possible. My editor took this picture on his knees, looking through the benches in Prospect Park in Brooklyn here in New York. I've been to Prospect Park 1,000 times. I've never looked at it through the architecture of a bench. Look how different the whole park looks. I'll never see Prospect Park quite the same way. I believe that, the man who stole my bracelet had a great saying. He said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them proportionally. I believe that great leaders are great listeners. It's a trait they all have. But for you, it's particularly important because you are making bespoke designs. You are creating something to solve a problem, and it's often cross-disciplinary. And you need to listen to the concerns and the problems and incorporate them into your solutions. And one of the ways that I try to solve the pertinent negative and listening, when I meet a new client, at the end of every conversation, I ask, is there anything we didn't discuss today that you want to bring to the table? It shows that you're listening to their concerns, and it also covers to make sure that all the issues that need to be addressed are addressed. 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionally. I want you to think about incorporating the creativity and resourcefulness of the artist Elan Etsui. He was born in Ghana. He worked in Nigeria, and he made these larger than life resplendent sculptures. They're all over the world. How did he do it? He would go to distilleries and he'd go into the rubbish bins and he'd pull out the bottle caps, vodka, alcohol, beer, whatever he could find, flatten them, hammered them, and sewed them together to make this. And what I'm showing you is the same work of art. It's called Grace and Gravity from 2010. And I want to show you how different it looks hanging in 3 different museums. When Elan Etsui sends a work of art, they're not necessarily hanging instructions. The museum hangs it in the space as it sees fit. And it's a reminder to each of you, no 2 problems, no 2 solutions, no 2 people, no 2 anything are ever exactly the same. And it's up to you to articulate the similarities and differences among and between them. Life is going to be asymmetrical for a while, and that's okay. We can live with asymmetry. We can bring order to asymmetry, and sometimes we can embrace the beauty in asymmetry and solve the problems. But sometimes looking for that commonality is a hard thing to find. Here you're looking at a Titian and a Picasso, different palettes, different genders, and yet there's still a dignity. The pictures are formidable. The subjects are formidable. They're gazing at you in similar ways. Sometimes it's hard to find commonality and a theme, but if you look hard with a multifaceted lens, you can. The world is definitely upside down right now, no question about it. But you have the tools to not only write it, but when it comes back to whatever the new normal looks like, let's try to make it better than it was before. Look in the mirror at the end of every day. You're not going to see this. This is Magritte's version of what you look in the mirror. Ask yourself what went right, what went wrong, how am I going to replicate what I did right, and how am I going to avoid what I did wrong? Because self-perception is critical to personal and professional growth. This is a work of Kusama, Yayoi Kusama, and it reminds me about situational awareness and orienting yourself to a changing situation. I work with military teams that work in hostile environments, and I always tell them, as soon as you situate yourself and you know where you are, you can do anything. And the beautiful thing about Kusama's installations, she works with dots and she works with mirrors and rooms. They're called infinity rooms. And once you can place yourself in a Kusama room and you have your bearings of where you are, you can begin to appreciate all the facets of her artwork. But it's not easy to do because your eyes are just, they're going everywhere and the reflections seem infinite. But it's a skill that I believe in service design you have and you master. You figure out where you are and where you go from there. This involves looking for new sources of light, always. In the very first slide that I showed you, you had to rub your eyes to bring it into focus. And in the penultimate slide, I'm going to ask you to do the same. Bring this painting of 1627 into focus. And as you do, you can see the extraordinary light coming through the window, the intricate window. You see the man at his desk, and you see the interior in a new light. Never stop looking for new sources of light and new ways to do things. I know that's inherent in the work that you're doing. And that's why what you're doing is so laudable, really excellent. And my last slide, that is my website. If any of you have any questions or you would like to write, or you'd like to request the digital summary of today's presentation, you can send us an email. That is my book, Visual Intelligence, from 2016. My new book is just available on Amazon as of yesterday. It's called Fixed: How to Perfect the Fine Art of Problem Solving, which I think could be really interesting for all of you. That's where I am on social media. But more importantly, I wanted to give you a before and after version of what your work and your world might look like before and after the art of perception. And I've chosen 2 portraits by the artist Chuck Close. Now, many of you know Chuck Close as a 20th and 21st century portrait painter, but you may not know that he's paralyzed from the shoulders down. He paints, he has minimal use of his fingers, and he paints with a brush in his mouth. And the portrait on the left side, done in 2005, is what your work looked like before our session together. Nothing wrong with seeing the world this way. It's a bald white man with green eyes, round glasses, a goatee, and a t-shirt looking right out at us. But I hope that after our session together, your work will look more like Chuck's portrait done 6 years later. He broke down every quadrant of information. He made it more compelling, more colorful, more complex. He lowered his glasses to not miss the big picture and the small details. And I believe that if you incorporate the things we talked about today, the 4 A's, how you frame your questions, your biases, your assumptions, your choice of words, the pertinent negative, and defaulting to your humanity, I think it makes you a sharper professional and a more interesting person. So I want to thank all of you for spending time with me this morning. And I do have a debrief question for you, and I'm happy to take questions in the chat room. I want to ask, can you just type in one thing that you're going to take away from today's presentation? One thing that resonated with you and your work. If you got nothing out of the talk, that's fine. You got to see art for about 75 minutes, beautiful works of art, which serves everybody well. But I'm interested to know if you could just type one thing into the chat room that you're going to take away from today's presentation. And I will also be happy to take any questions. So thank you all for having me. And let's see what we come up with for a debrief. There's no such thing as a main layer. Good. I have a question. Oh, well, we'll go through the debrief first, and then I'll take the questions. Perspective. Good. Not everything is fixable. Yeah, that's a hard concept. Nobody wants to think about that. Pertinent negatives. Yep, I work on them every day. I think every day, what am I not seeing? Good. To not freak out when we do not have the answers. That's a really good one. Don't freak out when you don't have the answers. Because A, somebody else might have them. And that reminds me of the elephant parable, which I'm going to tell you before we go away. So I see this question here. Devil is in the details. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. There's a question here. What are you keeping in mind when you navigate someone? I think it's important not only to put the artworks in front of students or others, but to have someone who can navigate well as you did for us today. It's a good question. And I'll share with you that some of my clients want to see my presentations before I do it. And I have to tell you that my slides will have no meaning unless you have my narrative. They're just a bunch of artworks because they don't know what I'm going to say. And the thing about navigating in artwork, I am an art historian, but when I lead my presentations, it's important for me to have the background knowledge of the artist and the precedent and the movement, but I don't speak from that level. So when you're navigating someone from looking at art, talk about the visual. What is it that you see? What is it that you notice? When my son was little, he really didn't enjoy going to museums, but I would take him in and I'd say, okay, pick one work of art in this room that you could take home with you, and which one would it be? And that would start the conversation. That kind of navigation from what we're drawn to gives you a great launch pad. What you're drawn to, why it resonated with you, and then start the discussion from there. That's where I would go. Zoom out sometimes, good. Use limitations to build. Many different artworks of Picasso to illustrate many different outputs you can create with your skills, good. Few resources. Let's reframe the world. I love that. I love it. So I want to thank you again, Caroline. Thank you very much for having me today, and keep doing what you're doing. I love your program. I love the concept and the ethos of your program, and all of you have the potential to change your world and the world with what you're doing. So kudos to you. And I'm going to start my PhD, hopefully, fingers crossed, if I can travel at the University of Leeds in September. So hopefully we'll all cross paths again in person somehow, some way. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Amy. That was, I mean, Rids, who introduced you to us, said that when she saw you the last time speaking, it blew her mind. And I think I could say the same for me and everyone else. It was a fantastic presentation and super powerful, and a reminder, a reminder about how powerful imagery is and how deep, and how actually also reflecting on what you were saying all the way through. It was like you were talking about service design, exactly. And I'm sure it's timely that you're here with us today, because it's the first day that we're all back together, and the students have started projects. Last term they worked on projects. They did what you were saying. They were observing, analyzing, understanding, and creating ideas, value, and now they've got to push that further. So I think it's a question of, like you've said, stand back and see things differently and reassess, and not be afraid, and go keep looking for answers. And I think many things you said were powerful, but how can you, if everyone's seeing things so differently, how are you going to bring people along with you to help them see things differently? And how are you going to put yourself in the shoes of someone else? So
it sounds like you could teach my course, Caroline. You've picked up all the salient features I wanted to communicate. But one of the things that one of your observations just reminded me, I wanted to share the parable of the elephant. And I think it would be a perfect way to close, because all the things you were just saying resonated with me as well. But I heard this recently, and it comes from the subcontinent of India, that there were 3 blind men in a village who had never seen an elephant. When they had their sight, they didn't know what an elephant looks like. So someone brought the elephant to the village, and the 3 blind men had to touch the elephant. One touched the tusk, one touched the ear, and one touched the backside. And the 3 men got into an argument about what the elephant must look like, because they all touched different parts of it. But they realized that had they not communicated their 3 different experiences, none of them would have a full vision of the elephant. And I think that we need to carry that over, because what we experience with elephants, literally and figuratively, we all experience something different with a problem. And so we must communicate with each other to understand the whole problem and experience the whole thing, because if we don't, each of us is going to have a lesser experience. And so diversity and inclusion is such a big concept now, but I like to think of it as multiple perspectives. Let's bring all our perspectives to solve the problem. And what's inherent in that is where we come from and who we are and our education and all those things. So I think the parable of the elephant is particularly applicable in service design, because you're all experiencing a different facet of a problem. And unless you communicate with each other, you're never going to reach a full solution.
That's actually something that in our very first lectures at the beginning of the year, one of our research lecturers actually showed us that same kind of imagery of the elephant and 3 people touching different parts. So I'm glad you reminded us and took us back there. I think that's really true.
I have a beautiful drawing by Rembrandt of the elephant, and I'm sad I didn't incorporate it into my presentation, but next time.
Yourself.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for all sharing your time. I know time is precious, and I really appreciate you having me. And as I said, I hope we can all meet in person sometime.
I will definitely invite you when you're over. Let us know, and we'll all create another event and catch up over a glass.
That would be wonderful. And hat tip to Rids again for bringing us all together. Thank you so much. All right, take good care, everyone. Stay well.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.